What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through the top waiver wire targets heading into week 10 of the NFL season. These are going to be players that are rostered in 40% or fewer leagues using the ESPN waiver wire. If you guys have any fantasy questions, drop them down below. If you enjoy the video, hit that like button, subscribe. But let's just dive right into some of the top targets here. And at this point in the season, there aren't going to be any clear studs just sitting around at the waiver wire. The best you're going to get probably the wide receiver position are risky starts week to week. At the running back position, though, I do think this is a spot where you could get some potential starters in the future, but they're going to be more of these handcuff backs. So we want to be targeting these valuable handcuffs where an injury could lead to them being running back twos or maybe even running back ones. And I think at this point, probably the most valuable handcuff is Blake Corum. He's rostered in 17.1% of leagues. We know the Rams have just gone out and absolutely force-fed Kyren Williams. In the past, when the Rams running back one has gone down, Sean McVay just pivots and puts that workload right on someone else. So if Kyren Williams were to go down with injury, I think Blake Corum steps up and becomes a super, super valuable play. Another guy kind of in a similar spot, probably not going to get the same type of workload, but we already have a one-game sample size with him as the starter. It's Ray Davis, rostered in 13.9% of leagues. In week 9, didn't have a huge workload, but he was very productive. 4 carries, 20 yards, 2 receptions for 70 yards and a touchdown. We saw, I think it was just 3-4 weeks ago, James Cook missed a game. Ray Davis stepped up, dominated the usage, and produced as the running back one. So I do think that if James Cook were to go down, Ray Davis is probably a top 15 running back week to week on this Bills offense. Now, the first wide receiver we have here, someone who actually didn't play this week, coming off a week 9 bye, it is going to be Ricky Pearsall, who's rostered in 18.4% of leagues. In week 8, the second game of his NFL career, he was targeted 4 times, caught all 4 of them for 38 yards, also had a 39-yard rush. So considering he was coming back from getting shot, a pretty solid second game for him. And then you just look at this wide receiver room. Ayuk obviously out for the season. You have Debo, who I think should be good to go for week 10, but was dealing with a rib injury in week 8. He's kind of been in and out, banged up throughout the season. You have Juwan Jennings, who's dealing with a hip injury. There's just a spot here in this offense where I think Ricky Pearsall could find a role. And maybe he's not all that great and he's just a filler wide receiver in year 1. But I do think if he's truly a really talented player, if he's good enough to produce for fantasy, I think there's going to be enough opportunity within this offense for him to do so. And even though CMC is coming back, this is an offense last year that with CMC, Kittle, Debo, and Ayuk healthy, all 4 of those dudes were producing. They were all relevant for fantasy. Debo, Ayuk were both wide receiver 2s. So it's not a spot where CMC coming back, I think buries the opportunity for a wide receiver 2. If Pearsall is talented enough to take advantage of the opportunity, I do think he could be relevant for fantasy. And at the wide receiver position, there's probably not going to be much better out there. Now we're just going to be running through a bunch of these handcuff running backs, some more valuable ones. Start off with Braelon Allen here, rostered in just under 25% of leagues. He really has lost any upside as a potential desperate weekly play. The usage has just kind of fallen off, but he is still the clear Breece Hall handcuff, still a very valuable player to roster. Roschon Johnson, rostered in 13.3% of leagues, the DeAndre Swift handcuff. DeAndre Swift goes down, Roschon Johnson stepping into a pretty significant role. Can be the early down guy, can also catch passes, you'd be used on the goal line. So definitely an interesting handcuff. Kimani Vidal, rostered in just under 5% of leagues. He is the J.K. Dobbins handcuff. Dobbins continues to dominate the usage. We know about his injury history. I think Vidal is interesting. Then we have a couple of tight end options who definitely could be playable at this point. The first one is going to be Taysom Hill, who's rostered in 26.8% of leagues. And this was almost the textbook Taysom Hill game that we'd be looking for. I guess minus a few pass attempts. But he was targeted 5 times, caught 4 of them for 41 yards. He had 5 carries for 19 yards and a touchdown. You look at the Saints' weapons. Chris Olave just suffered his second concussion of the season, got put out cold. It was, very bad. It was tough to watch. You don't imagine he's going to be back within the next few weeks. You have Rashid Shaheed, who's out for the season. The Saints need weapons, and with those guys out, they were targeting Taysom Hill in the passing game. He obviously had somewhat of a role on the ground. We've seen him get used, pretty heavily near the goal line. So I think at tight end, you could do worse than Taysom Hill, and he's probably in that fringe tight end 1 discussion moving forward. And then the other tight end who all of a sudden is very relevant is Mike Gesicki, who is rostered in 10.8% of leagues. And there have been a few positive things here for Gesicki over the past 2 weeks. So T. Higgins has missed the last couple of games, did not practice this week. And in those 2 games, Gesicki's balled out. Week 8, 7 for 73. Week 9, 5 for 100 and 2 touchdowns. And then we also now have an injury in the Bengals tight end room. Eric All is likely out for the season with the torn ACL, which honestly sucks because he was a rookie coming in off a torn ACL, was fun in his opportunities, but seems like he is now going to be missing, the rest of the season. And he was a tight end that played between 40 and 60% of the snaps, someone who was getting some opportunities as a pass catcher. So if Gesicki's now stepping into a larger role, especially in the short term, if T. Higgins continues to miss time, Gesicki at this point might be a playable option. The next couple of players I want to talk about here are what I'd consider double-headed handcuff running backs. They're not like the clear handcuff where they're going to step into a workhorse role, but I guess they have like double the odds to become relevant. So the first one is going to be Sean Tucker. We obviously saw in the one game that Rachaad White missed, him and Bucky Irving had a pretty even split. I think if Rachaad White or Bucky Irving were to go down, I think Sean Tucker steps into a fine role where he could be a running back 3 or like a running back 2 option, back end RB2 in a favorable matchup. So injury to Rachaad White or Bucky Irving. Bucky's been dealing with a toe injury. Rachaad White's had some injuries this season. Could potentially make him relevant. Don't think he's ever going to get like skyrocketed into that like mid to high end RB2, RB1 territory, barring an injury to both those running backs, but still someone who could, work his way into your lineup. The other guy here would be Jaylen Wright, who's like the double-headed handcuff for Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert. Achane continues to ball out. I loved him coming into the season. He's been a monster with Tua, but if Achane or Raheem Mostert were to go down, not crazy to think that Jaylen Wright, could earn a role that would be playable within this offense. And then the last few names I want to run through, kind of some younger wide receivers here. The first one is going to be Demario Douglas. He's rostered in 27.5% of leagues, and we have seen 2 healthy games that he has played with Drake May, and he's been peppered with targets in both of them. Week 6, his best game of the season, 9 targets, 6 receptions for 92 yards and a touchdown. Then week 7, he left early with injury. I believe he was sick. I think it was the London game. And then week 8, Drake May leaves early with a concussion. So then week 9, Demario Douglas, 9 targets, 7 receptions for 35 yards. Nothing crazy, like 10.5 PPR points, pretty much nothing in, half-point PPR, non-PPR leagues. But it does look like he's the Patriots' most valuable wide receiver. I think Drake May has been pretty encouraging, especially, just on the offense he is a part of. So Demario Douglas, someone who could be like a desperate start as long as May continues to stay healthy and play well. Then I have Quentin Johnston, rostered in 21% of leagues. After just completely face-planting in year 1, he is starting to show some life here in year 2. Week 9, he goes 4 for 118 and a touchdown. In his 5 healthy matchups, he's averaging 13.1 PPR points per game. And in those 5 games, he has 4 total touchdowns. I don't think he's a super reliable weekly play. I don't think he has a very high floor, but he could certainly be a desperate fringe start with bye weeks and injuries. And then the final player here is going to be Xavier Legette, rostered in 32.6% of leagues. And after last week, it seemed like Jalen Coker had kind of stepped up, maybe overtaken Legette on the wide receiver depth chart. But he took those starting snaps back here in week 9, 93% route participation. He has scored a touchdown in 4 of his last 5 healthy games. He has put up 11 plus PPR points in 4 of those. The issue here for Legette is that Bryce Young picks up a win. If they're keeping him at quarterback, he's likely going to have a capped ceiling rest of season. You also consider the fact that Adam Thielen might be coming back, who's going to command volume. There's definitely a route where even if Legette is fairly talented, he's not going to pan out for fantasy this year. But, I talk about this a lot. If these young players start to show out, prove they're talented, it's worth at least, having a speculative ad on them. So that's going to wrap it up for my top waiver wire targets. Some of these younger wide receiver options, and then also some of these handcuff running backs, plus a few tight ends thrown in there. But if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.